Hi everyone and welcome back to another video, and today we'll be talking about AQA A-Level Sociology Crime and Deviance Revision. So this is my final video as part of my long walkthrough series, and I have a feeling that this is going to be the longest one yet. So let's just buckle up and get right into it. So if you don't know already, Crime and Deviance appears on paper 3 and it is worth 50 marks out of 80 on that paper, and it consists of 4 questions, which is a 4 marker, a 6 marker, a 10 marker and a 30 marker. And then the other part of this paper I've done in a previous video, so check that out if you want to do revision for that one. And this is the spec from AQA saying what students need to learn in order to basically succeed in their crime and deviance section of the paper. I won't go through it, I'll let you pause and look at it for yourselves, but I've broken it down and these are the topics in the video that I will be covering. And as you can see, it is so long. It's ridiculously long. I don't know why it's so big, but yeah, let's start off with the intro. So, what actually is crime and deviance? Well, crime refers to any act that violates a society's law and is punishable by the government. Crimes are socially constructed, which means that they are defined within a specific cultural time and place. Deviance, however, refers to behaviour which at a specific time and in a specific place is seen as wrong. A deviant act may or may not be criminal. It deviates from what is socially acceptable but may not be against the law. So, as I hinted at there, crime and deviance can vary both temporally and/or spatially. The idea that crime is temporal refers to how definitions and perception of crime can change over time. What is considered criminal in one era might be accepted in another and vice versa. So an example of this would be how, for example, homosexuality was illegal prior to 1967, whereas now, obviously it's legal, you can get married, things like that. So it just shows how it can change over time. Spatial variations, however, refer to how crime differs across locations, whether across different countries, regions, or even neighbourhoods. Certain areas have higher crime rates due to factors like poverty, policing, urbanisation, or cultural norms. Crime and deviance is also socially constructed, depending on its history, its context, its culture, or generation. So history, what was once acceptable may become illegal or deviant over time, or vice versa. So an example of this would be the criminalisation of marital rape in the UK in 1991. So like that says, before 1991 it was perfectly fine, to commit marital rape, like it wasn't deemed as rape. Well, obviously now that's changed. Context, behaviours that are acceptable in certain situations would not be in others. For example, wearing a bikini on the beach versus on the high street. So that is more of a deviant act rather than criminal, It goes against societal norms, hence it's deviance, and people might go, that's a bit weird, that's a bit peculiar, because, it's not societal accepted behaviour. Culture, what is considered acceptable or rude varies depending on the culture you are in. For example, leaving food in your plate in China is a sign that your host has fed you well, whereas in the UK that would be seen as disrespectful. Again, that is another deviant act rather than criminal. And then generation. Some behaviours are acceptable from certain age groups, and some activities for other age groups. For example, drinking alcohol under the age of 18 in the UK. Then we have Plummer, who made a distinction between situational deviance and societal deviance. Societal deviance refers to forms of deviance that most members of society regard as deviant as they share similar norms and values. For example, murder, rape, child abuse, etc. Situational deviance refers to the way in which an act being seen as deviant or not depends on the context or location in which it takes place. For example, walking barefoot in public. So again, it's that whole thing like, that's weird, but whereas similar to the other beach one, if you walk on the beach barefooted, it's just like, yeah, that's fine. It's what people do. But then, you won't get someone walking around Tesco with the bare dogs out, would you? Like, that's a bit weird. So we know now all these different types of behaviours and actions, But how do we actually control people's actions knowing all this information? So formal social control refers to the enforcement of socially accepted behaviour by agents of the criminal justice system, such as the police, prison officers, etc. Informal social control refers to the enforcement of socially accepted behaviour by lay members of the public, such as parents, teachers, and peers. Positive sanctions are actions that reward good behaviour, such as clapping, pay increases, school certificates, MBs, etc. And negative sanctions are actions that punish poor behaviour, such as booing, fines, imprisonment, death penalty, etc. So it can be formally and informally controlled, and then within those places of control, the behaviour can be either be punished or rewarded to help, increase or decrease that behaviour. And now that we've got all our background knowledge we need to know, we're going to start off with our first proper topic, which is functionalism, and this is the start of all the theoretical perspectives. For some reason, I always start with functionalism, and of course, functionalism, you have to talk about Emile Durkheim, because he always loves to get his opinion in just anywhere he can. And he said that crime is normal, and it is in fact an integral part of all healthy societies. Anomie refers to a state of normlessness or a breakdown in social order, often occurring during periods of rapid change, uncertainty, or crisis. The concept was developed by Emile Durkheim, who argued that anomie arises when individuals no longer feel connected to the collective norms and values of society. Durkheim argued that in a functioning society, there is a conscious collective, a shared set of norms and values, in which consequently to society's institutions, the vast majority in society has been socialized. So why is crime and deviance found in all societies? 1. Not everyone is equally effectively socialized into the shared norms and values, so some individuals will be prone to deviate, for example, inadequate primary socialization. So the new right would say, children of a single parent family are inadequately primarily socialized and therefore more likely to be criminal. And 2, in complex modern societies, there is a diversity of lifestyles and values. This leads to different groups developing their own subcultures with distinctive norms and values. Mainstream culture may see these as deviant. So, since Durkheim identified that crime is such an integral part of our society, functionalists decided on 5 main positive functions of crime, with the first being boundary maintenance by Durkheim himself, saying that the purpose of punishment is to reaffirm society's shared rules and reinforce social solidarity. Crime produces a reaction from society, uniting its members in condemnation of the wrongdoer and reinforcing their commitment to the shared norms and values. This could be done through the courtroom, newsroom, or wider societal reactions. So an example of this would be the One Love concert that followed the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester that was bombed. I believe it was in 2017. I might be wrong, but basically from a negative act, which was the bombings, they were able to have a new concert where they could celebrate and all come together, showing, their boundaries put up against the wrongdoers, basically. The next one is adaptation and change. All change starts with an act of deviance. Deviancy drives forward social change. Individuals with new ideas, values, and ways of living must not be completely stifled. If those with new ideas are suppressed, society will stagnate. For example, in the 1950s and 1960s, segregation laws treated Black Americans unfairly, and activists like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. broke these laws. Though illegal at the time, their actions challenged outdated norms and sparked legal changes, eventually leading to new laws promoting equality. Next we have safety valve, identified by Polsky and Davis. So crime and deviance can act as a safety valve, that is, protect society from a more harmful alternative. Davis argued that prostitution acts as a safety valve for the release of men's sexual frustrations without threatening the nuclear family. Similarly, Polsky argued that pornography safely channels a variety of sexual desires away from alternatives such as adultery or assault, which could pose a much greater threat to a woman. Warning device, which is identified by Cohen. Crime and deviance provides a warning that an institution is not functioning properly. For example, high rates of truancy may tell us that there are problems with the education system and that policymakers need to make appropriate changes to it. And the final one is licensed deviancy. Societies sometimes also manage and regulate deviancy rather than seeking to ban it entirely. Regulation helps to minimise the most serious impacts of certain behaviours. For example, carnivals, festivals, violent sport, and student freshers' week all license misbehaviour that in other contexts may be punished. So, evaluating the 5 positive functions of crime. I'll let you pause this and read through it just to save the length of this video, but pause now! And we're back. So the next part we're talking about is strain theory, identified by Merton. This is still functionalism, just so you all know. And Merton did not agree with other functionalists that all aspects of society were always beneficial. Crime and deviance were evidence of a poor fit or a strain between the socially accepted goals of society and the socially approved means of obtaining these desired goals. Merton saw the main goals as wealth and power, as represented in the American dream. Supposedly, even the poorest had opportunities to reach the highest levels of society, which is what we know as meritocracy. However, the reality is different. Many disadvantaged groups are denied opportunities to achieve legitimately. This produces frustration, and this in turn creates a pressure to resort to illegitimate means, which is pressure to deviate. This is increased by the fact that American culture emphasizes achieving success at any costs. Winning the game becomes more important than playing by the rules. And when looking at strain theory, Merton identified that there were 5 responses to that said strain. The first being conformity. Individuals accept the culturally approved goals and strive to achieve them legitimately. This is most likely amongst middle-class individuals who have had good opportunities to achieve. This is the typical response of most Americans. Then we have innovation. Individuals accept the goals of money and success, but use new illegitimate means such as theft or fraud to achieve it. And this is common by those at the lower end of the class structure who are under great pressure to innovate. Then we have ritualism. Individuals give up trying to achieve the goals, but have internalized the legitimate means, and so they follow the rules for their own sake. This is typical of low middle class office workers in dead-end routine jobs. Then we have retreatism. Individuals reject both the goals and legitimate means and become dropouts. Merton includes psychotics, outcasts, vagrants, tramps, chronic drunkards, and drug addicts as examples. And finally, rebellion. Individuals reject the existing society's goals and means, but they replace them with new ones in a desire to bring out revolutionary change and create a new kind of society. Rebels include political radicals and countercultures such as hippies. Evaluating, yet again, you can probably see a theme when we have a screen looking like this. I'll let you pause and read through it yourself just to save time, and also out of fear that it might become a bit too repetitive, especially with the positives. Next we have subcultural theory, and yes, this is still functionalism. Functionalism is very wrong for crime compared to the other theories. But anyways, subcultural strain theories see deviance as the product of a delinquent subculture with different values from those of the mainstream society. They see subcultures as providing an alternative opportunity structure for those who denied the chance to achieve by legitimate means, mainly those in the working class. From this point of view, subcultures are a solution to a problem and therefore functional for their members, even if not for wider society. Next we have Cohen's thoughts and views. So Cohen found that much offending behaviour was not economically motivated and therefore didn't seem to fit Merton's idea of the innovator. It was non-utilitarian crime, such as vandalism and violence. Lower-class boys strove to emulate middle-class values and aspirations but lacked the means to attain success. This led to status frustration, personal failure and inadequacy. For example, working-class children are much more likely to fail at school, leaving them feeling humiliated. To gain status, they invert traditional middle-class values by behaving badly and engaging in a variety of antisocial behaviours. By doing so, they gain status within their peer groups who have similar values. Together, they form a subculture with its own distinctive anti-school values. An example of this will be Paul Willis's 1977 Learned Labour study. I've mentioned this a lot, especially in my education video, so I won't go into too much depth, assuming that you've watched that video. This is why group or gang crime was attractive. It gave them the chance to have their crime witnessed by their peer group, so they could get more respect for them and increase their status. Next, we have Cloard and Olwyn, who identified 3 different types of subcultures, the first being criminal subcultures, and these provided youths with almost like an apprenticeship for a career in utilitarian crime. They arise in their neighbourhoods with a long-standing and stable criminal culture, an established hierarchy of professional adult crime. This allows the young to associate with adult criminals, who can select those with the right aptitudes and abilities, and provides them with training and role models, as well as opportunities for employment on the criminal career ladder, with an example of this being the mafia. Conflict subcultures. They arise in areas of high population turnover. This results in high levels of social disorganisation and prevents a stable professional criminal network developing. Its absence means that the only illegitimate opportunities available are within loosely organised gangs. Violence provides a release for young men's frustrations at their blocked opportunities, as well as an alternative source of status that they can earn by winning turf, also known as territories, from rival gangs, with examples of this being inner city area gangs. So think of places like London or Birmingham, places with high levels of poverty and deprivation, inner cities forming gangs. Retreatist subcultures. These tend to occur where individuals have no opportunity or ability to engage in either of the other 2 subcultures or to achieve success in legitimate ways. They are double failures. The result is a retreat into alcohol or drugs, spending their time with others who have dropped out of society in a similar way. Social services help facilitate these, that is, with shared or sheltered accommodation in deprived areas. Again, I'm going to pause, let you go through this, but this is evaluating subcultural theory. We are now moving on to our next topic, which is Marxist theory and crime, and we're going to start off with how capitalism is criminogenic. So Gordon says that crime is inevitable because capitalism, by its very nature, is criminogenic. Capitalism is based on the exploitation of the working class by the ruling capitalist class. The workers are used to create profit for the capitalist class. Capitalism gives rise to working class, which is blue-collar crime, in several ways. Those in poverty turn to crime to survive. It is a rational choice, such as shoplifting. Advertising and marketing promotes a consumer culture that leads some to turn to utilitarian crimes, such as theft. And third, alienation within the capitalist society drives frustration and aggression, leading to non-utilitarian crimes, such as violence and vandalism. Capitalists are encouraged to commit corporate or white-collar crime, too, by capitalism. Competition drives corporations to commit corporate crime, for example, tax evasion, breach of health and safety laws, etc. Businesses will remain in business if they are profitable. This can promote criminality if legitimate means drive fewer or no profits. Businesses compete with one another with excessive risk-taking to look better than competitors. Individuals are driven within organisations to commit crimes given the target culture. For example, Nick Leeson was a manager for Barron's Bank. He carried out illegal trades to maximise company profits, and these trades backfired, leading to the bankruptcy of the company. The money was not for his own material gain directly, but would represent the success of him as a manager. And we're going to look into things like that further with corporate crimes, like crime within the workplace, and there's 2 different types of that. So you have occupational crime, which is crime committed by employees against their employer for their own gain, for example, stealing from the company or its customers, and corporate crime, which is committed by employees for their organisations in the pursuit of its goals, such as profit making. So financial crime, like we've just discussed, is an example of Nick Leeson committing fraud. Then we have crimes against consumers, for example, selling mislabeled food, And an example of that would be the Tesco horse meat scandal. And if I remember rightly, I think it was like 2013 or something. But I know it was burgers. I think it was lasagnas as well. For those who don't know, it was labelled as like 100% British beef or whatever. But actually, when it was tested, it was found out the beef was not 100%, and it actually contained traces of horse meat. So that's fun. Then we have crimes against the employees. For example, discrimination, wage violations, denial of union membership, industrial disease, and death. And fun fact, well, not really fun, but there are more workplace deaths each year to negligence than murder. Bet you didn't know that, did you? It's because I don't want you to know that. Also, crime against the environment, such as illegal pollution, toxic waste dumping. An example of this would be VW, so Volkswagen, how they disguised exhaust emissions that were 40 times over the limit. And there are about 40,000 deaths per year in the UK from air pollution. So I'm just going to tease a little bit what we're going to talk about later. But I want you to think about, well, technically, if they're doing illegal emissions, are they not like murdering these people? Like, how did they get away with this? Just keep that in mind. Just hold that there. And then state corporate crimes, when government bodies and businesses collude to commit crime. So private companies subtracted to assist US military have committed torture, for example, in I don't know how it says Guantanamo Bay. Am I saying that right? I can't read, as you can tell probably from these videos. I do stutter quite a lot. So, why is corporate crime invisible? Why is it so under-policed and under-reported and generally just unheard of? Well, a part of this is that the media gives limited coverage and uses sanitised language. For example, financial irregularities, mis-selling and accidental death. Political populism means that politicians focus on street crime to get elected. Obviously, we have one of Rishi Sunak's pledges. Obviously, he's not Prime Minister anymore. This was like, what was it, 2022 to 2024? Honestly, there was that many Prime Ministers at one point during like the late 2010s. Like, I actually don't even know who was where when anymore. But yeah, he was there. One of Rishi Sunak's pledges was crime-based, looking at stopping illegal immigration. This was a vote winner as well as being newsworthy. Also, corporate law is very complex and takes a long time to process. For example, the Grenfell Tower investigation took 7 years to fully investigate. It was only recently that it actually, kind of got sorted, but still justice is not completely served. But anyway, that's a rampage for another day. Underreporting. Consumers and employees are often reluctant to say that they have been a victim or they don't know. So, for example, the Me Too movement or the VW customers who didn't know they had illegal amounts of emissions being pumped out of the cars every day. Okay, so next we have the state and the legal system. So Marxists argue that the criminal justice system is an ideological state apparatus that serves the interests of the capitalist class, as we've established many times before. Chambliss argues that the protection of the private property and wealth is the cornerstone of the legal system. The legal system is run by the ruling elite for the ruling elite. An example would be how laws around tax evasion are enforced while benefit fraud, often committed by working class individuals, is heavily prosecuted and publicly condemned. Large-scale corporate tax avoidance by wealthy elites is rarely pursued with the same intensity. An example of this would be Apple. So basically, just to sum it up quickly, Apple sorts out its like taxes and finances in the country of Ireland because it basically has a deal with the Irish government where it's able to pay less taxes compared to other countries. That's how they like fiddle the way through it. That's just a simple way of putting it, really. Marxists argue that the ruling class holds the power to block or weaken laws that threaten their interests, shaping the legal system to serve their own interests. This results in selective enforcement, where powerless groups such as working class and minority ethnic communities are more likely to be criminalised, while the crimes of the wealthy and powerful are often overlooked. Ryman supports this view by highlighting how street crimes typically associate with poor individuals, face disproportionately high prosecution rates, whereas offences like tax evasion and health and safety violations committed by elites are treated with far greater leniency. So an example of this would be the collapse of the Rana Plaza factory. So this was a factory in Bangladesh, and I believe it produced clothing for places like Marks and Spencer's. Don't quote me on that though. But basically this just shows how companies outsource cheap labour in low-income countries, and they have a lack of health and safety laws, which leads to disasters like this where I can't remember if it was hundreds or if not even thousands of people died, but safe to say it was a fatal accident. As you can see from the picture there, it is very brutal. According to Gordon, selective law enforcement benefits the capitalist system in three major ways. By punishing individuals and making them responsible for their actions, defining these individuals as social failures, we ignore the failings of the system that leads to the conditions of inequality and poverty that create the conditions which lead to crime. The imprisonment of selected members of lower classes neutralizes opposition to the system, and the imprisonment of many members of the underclass also sweeps out of sight the social fallouts of capitalism, such that we cannot see it. So now we have our next section of Marxism and crime, which is ideological functions of crime in the law. So the repressive state apparatus directly and obviously controls the proletariat through violence or threat of it, and compromises of the formal mechanisms of social control: the government, the armed forces, the police and the criminal justice system. The ideological state apparatus, however, controls us more subtly by socialising us into accepting the capitalist ideology through informal mechanisms of social control such as the family, media, education and religion. The ISAs are used to show us those who are deviant by keeping us scared, and therefore can justify the use of RSA. And then looking at the role of the media, so the media often portrays criminals as disturbed individuals who have made the wrong choices. The media focuses on the crimes of the poor and neglects corporate or white-collar crimes. This helps to drive the working classes apart, blaming those successfully labelled as criminals for their actions rather than capitalism itself. For example, the public often exaggerates the cost of benefit fraud to the state and under-exaggerates the cost of tax evasion. Jones argues that 20 times more money is lost to corporate tax avoidance and evasion than benefit fraud. The legal system can help embed false consciousness whereby people are unaware of their exploitation. The minimum wage, health and safety laws, and legal rights over leave of absence present the caring phase of capitalism where they benefit capitalism more than the workers by keeping the workforce healthy and able to buy the goods that capitalism produces. So next we're looking at the construction of crime by the powerful, which is discussed by Box. So we're taught to fear a narrow image of the criminal, which is often young, male, working class and black, just as official statistics portray. But crime is a social construct shaped by those in power. Murder is framed through selective stereotypes: who commits it, how and why. Other forms of killing are downplayed or reclassified as less serious or even deemed legitimate. The people who commit legally defined murder are usually poorer and less powerful than those who commit other avoidable killing. For example, the death of Ella Casey Deborah, because it was directly linked to prolonged exposure to illegal levels of air pollution near her home in South London. The coroner concluded that air pollution was a significant factor in her death, and that failures by authorities to reduce pollution and inform the public about its dangers contributed to the outcome. So basically her death, leading up to her death, she experienced many asthma attacks and things like that, and respiratory issues, and she went to the hospital on frequent occasions by this. So originally her death wasn't marked down for that, but then through her mother fighting for justice, she's the only person whose death has been caused by air pollution in the UK. She's the only one who has that official title, but the government is reluctant to do this because it not only blames, for example, the people driving vehicles or the companies. Like, they don't want to take that responsibility of basically being labelled as murderers, so that's how they brush it off. And then we have the evaluation. Yet again, I'll let you pause this and read through it. And then as a part of Marxism, we're also going to talk about neo-Marxism. So neo-Marxists argue that traditional Marxism is deterministic because it says that workers are driven to crime out of necessity, whereas neo-Marxists take a voluntaristic view. Crime is a meaningful action and a conscious choice. So individuals have free will and agency and they choose to commit crimes. Crime often has a political motive, and criminals are not passive puppets whose behaviour is shaped by capitalism. They are deliberately trying to change society. So Taylor and Long looked at the new criminology, and they developed the social theory of deviance, and that helps us to understand why crime takes place. So that's the wider origin of the deviant act, the immediate origin of the deviant act, the actual act, the immediate social reaction to the act, the wider origins of the societal reaction, and the outcome of the reaction on the deviant's further actions. And I'll let you look at them once again. So our next topic is labelling theory, and they argue that crime is a measure of detection and not occurrence. So interactionist theorists are not interested in why people commit crime, but they are interested in why some people get caught for committing crimes and are labelled negatively, and why some people aren't caught or negatively labelled at all. Studies are carried out to compensate for the weaknesses of official crime stats, showing the number of people that admit to committing crime. Most people will have committed a criminal act and yet have not been caught. For example, in 2015 it was found that, and there's a list there, of the British public admit to breaking the following crimes. So, Howard Becker says, it is not the nature of the act that makes it deviant, but society's reaction to the event. A criminal is only someone who has been labelled as a criminal. If you're not labelled, you're simply not a criminal. Both crime and the criminal are socially constructed. Outsiders are outlaws or deviants that have broken a law created by people in a position of power to do so. That is, for example, moral entrepreneurs. Agents of the state will lobby for law changes to increase their own power. For example, US cannabis laws were introduced in the 1930s under pressure from newly established FBM, despite smoking, tobacco and alcohol consumption being more harmful. It takes so many officers to arrest one cannabis user as it is a stage to empower the law enforcer. By having lots of police officers, it sends a message to the public that both the act and the actor is deviant. So for example, like something that like might be minor, for example, like cannabis use, just like on a low level, you know, you're not dealing it or anything, just for like personal use. Like I know some people use it for medical reasons or things like that. But you know, in like TV shows, for example, or like policing episodes or something, you might see, you know, like loads of officers for just one simple person just smoking. They're like, they might not be resisting or anything, they might be going along with it. But it's the performative act of, oh, well, I won't do that drug because have you seen what happens to that person when they get caught? It's just this whole performance. So, who provides the label? Moral entrepreneurs are people who go on moral crusades to change the law so that a deviant activity can be formally punished. Remember these as the 3 Ps. So we have the police, politicians, and the press, which is like the media. A moral crusade is when a group of people in positions of power collaborate to collectively bring attention to a deviant act to inform the public of the harm of the deviant act with the aim to outlaw it. Marxists would argue that moral crusades aim to divide and conquer the proletariat. Many working class readers of the news will believe the label to be true. This promotes false consciousness as it diverts people away from the inequalities of capitalism. The story moves away from colonial history and the slave trade. Instead, it focuses on violence. Okay, so next we're looking at Peliarvin and Breyer, who said that there are 3 factors that influence whether someone gets punished. That is previous history of formal agents of control, so that's whether if they've been convicted of a crime before. circumstances of the offence, for example, the time of day, or the appearance and background of the offender, so that could be the gender, ethnicity, age, anything like that really. And for this example, we're going to have, if you remember, the pulling down of the statue in Bristol during the BLM movement, and the majority of people were students, so just bear that in mind. 4 people were arrested and tried but were acquitted in court. This is perhaps due to the circumstances, that is part of the BLM protest. They had mass public support. Also, those involved were mostly educated middle-class students, many of whom studied at Bristol University. These are the sorts of people that the criminal justice system does not systematically encourage us to despise. And then we have Cicero. So Cicero argued that officers' decisions to arrest are influenced by their stereotypes about offenders. For example, he found that officers' typifications, which is their common sense theories or stereotypes of what the typical delinquent is like, led them to concentrate on certain individuals. So why are more working class males from inner city areas reflected in official crime statistics? Well, officers' decisions to arrest are influenced by their stereotypes about offenders. Cicero found that officers' typifications led them to concentrate on certain types. This resulted in law enforcement showing a class bias in that working class areas and people fitted the police typifications most closely. In turn, this led police to patrol working class areas more intensively, resulting in more arrests and confirming their stereotypes, and then that's just like a cycle that just keeps repeating itself. Cicero also argued that justice is not fixed but negotiable. So when a middle-class youth is arrested, they are less likely to be charged. This is since their background doesn't fit the police's typifications. Also, their parents are more likely to be able to negotiate successfully on their behalf. For example, following the summer riots in 2024, a 14-year-old boy was brought to the police by his 2 parents, having seen him take part. The police let him off with a warning, saying that the punishment delivered by his parents was more effective than what they could have achieved themselves. And now looking at crime statistics and labelling. Crime statistics do not give us a valid picture of the pattern of crime and cannot be used as a resource. We should instead treat them as a topic to be investigated. Crime statistics are soft statistics. We should investigate the process that create crime stats, and the difference between the official statistics and the real rate of crime is sometimes called the dark figure, because we do not know for certain how much crime goes undetected, unreported, and unrecorded. So we're going to apply this to drink driving. So 48% of women and 68% of men have admitted to having driven whilst probably over the legal limit. Yet 25% of random breath tests are on women and 75% are on men. Men make up 8/9 of the conviction, where women only make up 1/9. Therefore, we shouldn't see the stats as facts. We need to examine the reason behind random testing. So next we're looking at Lemur, and they looked at how labelling can impact a person and how calling them a criminal, ultimately leads them to be and their actions. So one of them is being a badge of honour. So being labelled as such as an ASBO, which is an antisocial behaviour order, which was renamed to a CRIMBO, criminal behaviour order, in order to try dilute the badge of honour effect. However, these labels within, subcultures and like friend groups and peer groups, they were able to provide status and popularity because it's like, oh, look at me, I've got this, I've been noticed by the police. It was like kind of like a bragging right. Marginalisation. Some people may feel shamed, humiliated, shunned, or excluded from normal society. An example of this would be disintegrative shaming. And we also have a master status, also known as control and identity. Is the idea that when someone is labelled, they become known as that label, overriding all others. For example, Prince Andrew's master status has become labelled as a paedophile, rather than being a member of the royal family. He was stripped of some of his royal titles and duties, and he also lost some of the crown funding as a consequence of this. And then we have two types of deviance. So we have primary deviance. This refers to deviant acts that have not been publicly labelled. For example, fare dodging mostly goes on court. So that's, like, for example, like in like New York where you have the subway, if you have to like hop the barrier and you don't pay. Or the modern use of a dodgy box, so you can get your streaming platforms for free. That's another thing that goes unpoliced. These acts are not part of an organised deviant way of life. They have little significance for the individual's status or self-concept. Primary deviants don't generally see themselves as deviant. However, we also have secondary deviants, and this refers to future deviant acts because of the internalizing of the initial deviant label by the individual. Deviant careers are the deviant paths taken by those successfully labelled. For example, hippies smoked casually. However, after they were labelled as deviant group, they smoked more. Applying a label to this group did not stop the deviant activity. Instead, it caused them to become more deviant. Next, we have Braithwaite, who looked at reintegrative and disintegrative shaming. So disintegrative shaming is where not only the crime, but also the criminal is labelled as bad and the offender is excluded from society. Reintegrative shaming labels the act and not the actor, as if to say he has done a bad thing rather than he is a bad person. The policy of reintegrative shaming avoids stigmatising the offender as evil, while at the same time making them aware of the negative impact of their negative actions upon others and encourages others to forgive them. This helps to prevent them from being pushed into secondary deviance. Braithwaite argues that crime rates tend to be lower in societies where reintegrative shaming happens rather than disintegrative shaming. Again, I'll let you read this evaluation, so I'll pause now. Our next topic is realism, and it's safe to say if you do criminology, you have an advantage here because you'll already know all about it. But for those who don't know, realist approaches to crime emerged in the 1970s and 1980s, influenced by the rise of the New Right. Realism in criminology is divided into two main strands, right realism and left realism. Despite their ideological differences, both share some core assumptions. Realists accept police-recorded crime statistics as a useful starting point for understanding crime, arguing that these figures reflect real patterns of offending. They criticise traditional sociologist theories for being overly idealistic and for romanticising the criminal, often ignoring the genuine harm caused by crime. Realists are particularly concerned with the impact of crime on victims and communities. Unlike traditional theories, both right and left realism aim to offer practical, policy-based solutions to reduce crime and improve social safety. So we're going to start off with right realism. Right realists reject Marxist ideas such as poverty and unemployment as responsible for crime. They point to rising crime during periods of rising living standards as evidence. So, biological difference is one of their reasons. Certain individuals may have a stronger predisposition towards criminal behaviour due to innate traits. For instance, some people may be naturally more aggressive or prone to violence, making them more likely to engage in violent offences. Right realists argue that low intelligence, believed to be biologically determined, is one of the key contributing factors. And there's some stats, I'll let you pause and go through them, because I'll be here all day if not. Then another reason is socialisation and the underclass. Effective socialisation within a nuclear family decreases this risk since it involves learning self-control and internalising moral values. Murray argues that the underclass has developed as a result of the welfare state and a growing welfare dependency. He also argues that the growth of the lone parent matrifocals, that means headed by a woman, families, has led to rising crime rates as lone parents are ineffective agents of socialisation, especially for boys. So another reason why right realists believe people commit crime is due to rational choice. Rational choice theorists like Clark suggest that individuals commit crime based on a rational assessment of the potential outcomes. If the perceived benefits of offending outweigh the perceived risks or punishment and seem more rewarding than lawful alternatives, then individuals are more likely to choose criminal behaviour. This reflects a cost-benefit analysis approach to decision-making. Felton argues that for a crime to occur, there must be a motivated offender, a suitable target, the absence of a capable guardian, and offenders are assumed to act rationally, so the presence of a guardian is likely to deter them from offending. Felton argues that informal guardians are more effective than formal ones, so this could be people like neighbours, grandparents, parents, rather than people, say, like the police. Next we have the one and only controversial Margaret Thatcher, who said we should condemn more and understand less. Margaret Thatcher's phrase emphasises punishment and moral responsibility over sociological explanations. It rejects the idea that crime is caused by social factors like poverty, instead viewing it as a personal choice. This approach supports tougher law enforcement and traditional values, rather than rehabilitation or welfare-based responses. Crime can be reduced by making it a less attractive choice. Many measures as possible, such as target hardening, so making a house or a car more difficult to break into, so things like locks, surveillance, ring doorbells, neighbourhood watch schemes, etc. However, the crime prevention industry has arguably only moved the crime elsewhere, rather than reduce the total level. This is known as displacement. So, now that we know why people commit crime, well, how we're going to fix that, what are the solutions? So Wilson argues that poverty is not the main cause of crime, noting that most poor people do not offend. He believes crime must be tackled through strict law enforcement. His broken windows theory suggests that visible signs of neglect like vandalism create a climate and disorder that encourages more serious crime. Addressing minor issues helps maintain order and prevent further offending. Zero tolerance is a policing strategy that involves cracking down on minor infringements such as graffiti, unlicensed street trading, prostitution, etc., to try to create a situation in which crime is less possible. Now we're looking at left realism, and we have Tony Blair, who was our Prime Minister from 1997 to 2007, and the Labour government said that we should be tough on crime and tough on the underlying causes of crime. Left realists see crime in society because of inequality. However, they challenge the Marxist focus on corporate and white-collar crime. Left realists highlight that the most disadvantaged groups in society suffer the greatest impact from crime. Blair argued that crime was not just a matter of individual wrongdoing, but deeply rooted in social issues like poverty, unemployment, and community breakdown. He emphasised that effective crime policy required both firm law enforcement and proactive measures to address these underlying causes. His approach marked a shift from traditional conservative policies, positioning Labour as serious about public safety while also committed to social justice. So next we have left realists Lee and Young, who identified three causes of crime, the first being relative deprivation. So relative deprivation is the idea that an individual feels disadvantaged compared to others, despite circumstances such as increasing standards of living. This causes individuals to turn to crime as a form of innovation, identified by Merton as we spoke about earlier. The media fuels this by feeding us a diet of the importance of branded goods, leading to conspicuous consumption. Also, discrimination, particularly against Afro-Caribbean communities in education and employment, can block access to status and success. Number 2, marginalisation. Marginalised groups lack both clear goals and organisations to represent their interests. For example, youths are facing unemployment due to deindustrialisation and a decline in low-skilled jobs. They don't have trade unions to put pressure on both employers and politicians. This causes them to have no clear goals, leaving feelings of resentment and frustration. These individuals express their status frustration through criminal means, such as violence and rioting. Number 3, subcultures. Subcultures arise in response to status frustration. They are not separate from wider society since they share, for example, a high value placed on material wealth. In these ways, crime is related to the economic structure and goals of society. They have blocked opportunities to achieve the mainstream goals of consumer society in legitimate ways and turned to illegitimate ways to achieve them. For example, the use of knives to achieve status amongst peers. So again, now that we know the causes, what are the solutions? So, improve policing. Around 90% of crimes recorded by the police are initially reported by members of the public. However, due to consistently low detection and conviction rates, public trust in the police has declined, leading to reduced cooperation and fewer reports. In response, the police have adopted a strategy of military-style policing, involving heavy surveillance in high-crime areas and frequent use of stop-and-search powers. Yet, rather than reducing crime, these tactics have contributed to further marginalisation and alienation of working-class and BAME communities. So, for example, if I remember rightly, if you're a black male, you are 7 times more likely to be stopped and searched than your white counterpart. And policing should be made more accountable. So the police need to improve their relationship with the public by spending more time investigating crimes, changing their priorities from over-policing minor crimes and under-policing crimes such as domestic violence and racism. The police need to involve the public in the creation of police policies and be more representative of the communities they serve. This is through characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, etc. Then left realists also believe that we need to take a multi-agency approach. So left realists believe that crime control cannot be left to the police alone, but it needs to be a multi-agency approach. This would involve agencies working collaboratively such as social services, schools, housing departments, leisure services, as well as voluntary organisations and victim support, as well as the public at large. And also structural causes of crime. New Labour introduced a range of direct and indirect policies that aim to tackle the structural causes of crime. So antisocial behaviour disorders, as we already discussed, as opposed to tackle threatening behaviour, vandalism, graffiti and playing loud music at night, etc. The New Deal spent up to £3 billion to reduce unemployment by providing training, subsidised unemployment and voluntary work to unemployed under 25s. Improve funding to schools to help tackle truancy with attendance officers and community support officers based in some schools, and also Sure Start centres, which you'll remember from education if you've watched that video, to help improve childcare, early education, health and family support. Again, I'll just pause here and let you read the strengths and weaknesses. So, moving on to our next topic, we have crime prevention. And first we'll be looking at situational crime prevention, which is a right realist prevention of crime. So situational crime refers to the idea that people will commit crime when the perceived benefits outweigh the social and economic costs. That is a rational choice. Situational crime prevention refers to strategies which reduce the opportunity for criminals to commit crime, for example, CCTV. The intention being that the potential criminals will not commit the crime once they are aware that their opportunities are being reduced. Target hardening refers to physical changes to the environment to help limit the opportunities for crime or to benefit from such. Designing out crime refers to the use of urban planning that help to significantly reduce the crime rate. So for example, the target hardening, shutters, anti-climb pit, password on like phones, devices, things like that, or physical locks on doors, gates, etc. So a good sort of case study to look at when looking at crime prevention would be the Meadowell Estate in Northumberland, which is in the north of England. So prior to the implication of like new techniques or whatever, they faced problems of high levels of rioting, joyriding and burglary, and they also had a lack of formal and informal social control, which ultimately led to a higher criminality rate. And the strategies to design out crime, they implemented capable guardians, such as an increased police presence and community involvement, so that might be like neighbourhood watch schemes and also like patrolling police officers. Then there's the creation of defensible space, improving surveillance and reducing opportunities for crime. And it also changes to road layouts to enhance visibility and limit escape routes for criminals, So, making like roads like a dead end so they can't like run out. They're more likely to get caught that way. And the effectiveness of this was that utilitarian crimes fell by over 70%, indicating a significant reduction in crime. Also, local residents embraced the increased police presence, fostering a stronger sense of community. However, some concerns about crime displacement, and that means that crime may have been shifted to other areas rather than being completely eliminated. Okay, so another good case study to look at is York, but I'll let you have a look at it yourselves because I want to focus on the Port Authority bus terminal, which is in New York City. So Felson's approach to designing out crime focuses on situational crime prevention, where modifying the environment, such as reducing opportunities for crime through better urban design, can effectively deter criminal behaviour. So, in the bus terminal, there were high levels of crime disorder, including theft and drug-related offences. And because of this, the terminal was a crime attractor, drawing offenders due to its chaotic environment because it was basically known for crime. And this also led to commuters having fear due to a poor lighting, hidden corners, and lack of surveillance, as well as all of the crime. So, in order to design out the crime, they used situational crime prevention, as mentioned, and those techniques. But they also use crime prevention through environmental design, such as modifying entrances, corners, and bathrooms to reduce hiding spots, and they also increase police presence and better management of populations. And the effectiveness is that the terminal became less of a crime generator, reducing criminal activity. Crime was prevented rather than displaced, however, meaning that offenders did not simply move elsewhere. Commuters felt safer, improving the overall experience of using the terminal. An illustrator of this, or critique, would be Chaikin et al., who found that crime displacement occurs when prevention efforts simply shift crime rather than eliminate it. Their study of the New York subway robberies showed that crackdown efforts moved crime to the streets above. Displacement can be spatial, temporal, target-based, tactical, or functional, changing location, time, victim, method, or crime type. And I'll let you have a look at the stats there if you'd like. But from this, we can understand that one street in New York is simply not representative enough of everywhere in the whole world. Just because they found this experience doesn't mean that another environment will have the same outcomes. And again, to save time, I'll let you pause and look at the strengths and weaknesses. Next, we have environmental crime prevention, and this refers to strategies that aim to reduce crime by improving the physical environment. It is based on Wilson and Kellen's broken windows theory, which suggests that signs of disorder encourage further crime. Key approaches include zero-tolerance policing, crime prevention through environmental design, and community engagement to maintain order and deter criminal activity. So we've touched on this a little bit already. Formal social control refers to behaviour controlled by state agents and agencies, including police, courts, probation workers, prison guards, etc. Whereas informal social control refers to behaviour control by lay members of the public, including parents, peers, youths, leaders, etc. Broken windows theory argues that visible disorder signals a lack of control, encouraging further crime. Maintaining urban spaces through minor offence policing and environmental upkeep can prevent more serious crimes by reinforcing social order. This approach influenced zero-tolerance policing, notably in New York City. Broken windows theory and the self-fulfilling prophecy are linked through the idea that perceptions shape reality. If a neighborhood shows signs of disorder, people expect crime to be prevalent, I can't say that word, sorry, leading to reduced social control and increased criminal behaviour. Why is it important to re-empower local informal agents of social control in helping to reduce the crime rate? Informal agents are ever-present and can help prevent more crime. They are better targeted policing based on the knowledge of the local people. They are cost-effective, they are unpaid agents of social control, and they help win community respect for law and order in contrast to militaristic policing, which alienates communities. And then we have zero tolerance policing again. I feel like I'm just going to pause this and let you go through it because I feel like I've already touched on this quite a lot. Next, we're moving on to social and community crime prevention, which is more of a left realist approach. So, social and community crime prevention argues that alongside crime prevention measures, there needs to be a focus on individual offenders and a social context that encourages them to commit crime. This involves intervention. It is important to identify the groups most at risk of committing crime and to put into action forms of intervention to limit their offending. And also community. It is also important to involve the local community in combating crime. Farrington studied risk factors for criminal behaviour, particularly in youth. His research identified key predictors of offending: family criminality, poverty and socio-economic disadvantage, impulsivity and poor self-control, poor parenting and child rearing, and low school performance. Farrington's work emphasises early intervention to mitigate these risk factors and prevent criminal careers. An example of this would be the Perry Preschool Project, which was an early childhood education program for the disadvantaged African American children, aiming to provide long-term outcomes through structured learning and parental involvement. Studies found that participants had higher educational attainment, better employment prospects, and lower criminal activity compared to non-participants. And then I'll let you look at the strengths and weaknesses again. Right, this is our next topic, which is crime punishment. This video is very long, I know, I do apologise. We're literally just over halfway through the slides now, but I promise it'll be worth it in the end if you actually are listening now. Paper 3 was my highest scoring paper out of my 3 papers in my A-levels this year, so you might want to keep on listening. But it's currently 20 to 11 at night if you're actually listening now, and I'm like, oh, I'm tired. But, so, we have deterrence, incapacitation, retribution, and rehabilitation. I'm going to let you look through these purely because, yeah, I just can't be bothered. Right, I'm back now, I'll stop being lazy. Functionalism. How has punishment changed over time? The role of punishment is to uphold social solidarity and reinforce shared values. Pre-industrial. Retributive justice is where there is little specialisation in the division of labour. Crime damages all of society, given the similarities of members. There is a strong collective conscience whereby punishment is cruel and excessive and is expressive, seeking to show moral outrage. Whether in industrial times, restitutive justice is where there is lots of specialisation in the division of labour and interdependence between individuals. Crime damages interdependence of people, and justice needs to repair this by returning things to how they were. There is a weaker collective conscience. Punishment is less cruel or excessive but still needs to maintain boundaries. Criticisms of functionalism. There is no consensus on punishment in a postmodern society, with many advocating capital and corporal punishment despite outlawing in most Western societies. It also ignores the power imbalance in enforcing and receiving the law. That is, the judiciary is largely from an upper middle class, background, and prisoners are often from a working or underclass background. And then we have Marxists who argue that functionalism ignores the role of power and inequality. For example, that of the church or monarch in medieval Europe. Punishment protects the interests of the bourgeoisie. So looking at the early Middle Ages, punishment involves religious penance or fines as imprisonment with starved landowners of cheap labour. And in the late Middle Ages, this moved to punishments becoming more brutal to protect the vast accumulations of wealth of the rich. In industrial times, prisons developed to instill discipline associated with the new factory conditions. Deportation to colonies were part of a rule of terror. They now incarcerate a core of people alienated from the means of production who threaten the private property of the wealthy. Criticisms of Marxism. They ignore the gender and ethnicity aspects of punishment. They also ignore the very real punishments, including fines and prison offences committed by the bourgeoisie, that is, white-collar and corporate crimes. Next we have postmodernists, and we have Foucault, who said punishment is through the mind and not the body. We live in a prison-like society based on Bentham's panopticon. We are now living in a constant state of fear, so punishment is now through the mind rather than through the body. We worry that we may be caught or watched, and so we behave ourselves because of this. Society is fluid and constantly changing. Technology has allowed this to speed up. Wherever you move around, you'll be watched and tracked. And there are up to 4.2 million CCTV cameras in Britain. Postmodernists call this liquid surveillance. Criticisms of postmodernism. It is contradictory. You get what I'm saying. Is that the state has centralised control of populations, and yet people are still able to resist this and indeed surveil the state through citizen journalism. And political populism is using traditional forms of control, that is, imprisonment rather than self-punishment. So next we have surveillance. Surveillance is a process of monitoring behaviour through observations to gather data and use this data to change behaviour. Honestly, I'm looking at that and it's very overstimulating, so I'm just going to pause it and let you look through that again. I'm sorry. I hope you don't mind. Okay, so transcarceration is the idea that individuals become locked into a cycle of control, shifting between different carceral agencies during their life. For example, someone might be brought up in care, excluded internal and externally from school, then sent to a young offenders institution, and then eventually adult prison. Community control, discussed by Cohen. In recent years, there has been a growth in a range of community-based controls, such as curfews, community service orders, treatment orders, and electronic tagging. However, at the same time, the number in custody has been rising steadily, especially among the young. Cohen argued that the growth of community controls has simply cast the net of control over more people. Yet, community controls may divert individuals into the criminal justice system, amplifying their deviance. For example, some people argue that the police have used ASBOs as a way of fast-tracking young offenders into custodial sentences. Prison is just an expensive way of making bad people worse. It costs £65,000 to put someone in prison, and then £45,000 per year to keep someone there. And there are over 90,000 offenders in prison in England and Wales, and in the UK, 46% of all prisoners will re-offend within a year release, which was found in 2016. Strengths and weaknesses of prisons, and do they work? Yet again, you know what I'm going to say. Pause this now. Okay, luckily, so I actually managed to get through that one quite quickly, but now we're moving on to victimology. So victims are socially constructed. Christie says that a victim of crime is socially constructed. The people the media believes us to be a victim is not actually the typical victim. The typical victim is a stereotype favoured by the media and are typically weak, innocent and blameless. We have positivist victimology and critical victimology, which we're going to look at now. Okay, so first up we have Myers and victimization. So Myers looked at what makes someone more likely to be a victim than others. They focused on crimes between people, interpersonal crimes or violence. They looked at victims who may have contributed to their victimization. For example, if someone is attacked outside of a nightclub, they contribute to their own victimization by being intoxicated and being in a very crowded space where people can overreact, and a place where men will often do violence in order to reinforce their masculinity. Victim precipitation, which is identified by Wolfgang. This is the idea that a victim contributes to their own victimization again. And they did a study and found that out of 588 homicides in Philadelphia, 26% 26% of them involve the victim's contribution towards the homicide by using violence first. Next, we have von Hentig and victim proneness, and they said there are 13 characteristics which make someone more likely to be a victim, that is, victim prone. These include young, female, old, immigrants, depressed, mentally deranged, the acquisitive, dull, naive, minorities, wanton, the lonesome and heartbroken, tormentor, which are bullies, and blocked. You don't have to remember what all these are. I'm going to be honest, some of them I don't even know what they are. And an example of this would be Stephen Lawrence. So he was murdered as he was a minority, and Sarah Everard was raped and murdered as she was young and female, according to the victim proneness. Evaluation, again, I'll just let you have a look through this. And then on the other hand, we have critical victimology. So critical victimology is influenced by conflict theory, such as Marxism feminism. It believes that people are victims because of structural factors, such as class and gender, and the state's power to define who they decide as a victim. Structural factors such as patriarchy and poverty make someone more likely to be a victim than others. For example, poverty makes someone victim-prone due to living in a deprived area that suffers from high rates of displacement, in that those responsible for antisocial behaviour are often placed in areas by local authorities. This increases the citizens of these areas to be at greater risk of victimhood. Also, crime prevention methods like target hardening are also expensive, further increasing their likelihood. And then critical victimologists also argue that victims are socially constructed. The state has the power to define who they consider to be a victim. Because the label of a victim is a social construct, the state has the power to label some people as victims, but not others. So an example would be Ella Casey Deborah. I've already spoke about this, but you can pause the video now and read through it again and see how it applies to this situation. But to save time, I'm just going to move on. So then we have patterns of victimology. Victimology examines who is more likely to be a victim of a crime and how different social factors influence victimization. Here's a breakdown of key patterns. So we have repeat victims, class, age, gender, and ethnicity. I'm sorry to be a pain, but I'm going to have to let you look through them. So, what is the impact of victimization? Secondary victimization. This is the idea that in addition to the impact of the crime itself, individuals may suffer further victimization from the criminal justice system. For example, feminists would argue that rape victims are often treated poorly by the police and courts, that it amounts to a secondary victimization. Fear of victimization. Crime may cause a fear of becoming a victim. Surveys show this fear is often be irrational. For example, women are more afraid of going out of a fear attack, yet it is young men who are more at risk of attack from a stranger. A woman is more likely to know her offender. Crime may have serious physical and emotional impacts on its victims, including disrupted sleep, feelings of helplessness, increasing security consciousness, and difficulties in social functioning. Hate crimes against minorities may create waves of harm that radiate out to affect others. These are message crimes aimed at intimidating whole communities, not just primary victims. So an example of this could be the summer riots in 2024, where people were going out rioting across the country and setting fires to hotels that were housing immigrants and things like that. And shock horror to end the topic, we have AO3, strengths and weaknesses, and again I'll let you read through these in your own time. Moving on, next topic, we have crime statistics. So sociologists use three methods to collect information on crime statistics: official statistics, victim surveys, and self-report studies, and this is known as methodological triangulation. So, official statistics. Police recorded statistics are drawn from the records kept by police and other official agencies and are published every 6 months by the Home Office. These official statistics on crime are particularly useful and that they have been collected since 1857 and so provide an excellent historical overview of changing trends over time. They also give a very accurate view of the way that the criminal justice system processes offenders through arrests, trials, punishments, and so on. Another benefit of police recorded statistics is that they map out the outcomes, which is punishment. However, linking back to earlier, crime is a measure of detection and not occurrence. A crime only makes the statistics if it has been reported by the victim and recorded by the police. This leads to the dark figure of crime, which refers to the large volume of serious crimes that go unreported by the police. People may not report a crime to the police due to trivial, private matter, too embarrassed, may not be able to report as they are unaware of their victim status, a lack of faith in the police, or that the crimes will be reported to the police if that is that they are beneficial for the individual, or a fear of reprisal, which is revenge attacks. So, basically, like, you don't want to be got caught for being a grass, basically, out of fear that something might happen to you as a consequence. Then we have victim surveys. So, victim studies are based on surveys asking a sample of people whether they have been victims of a crime, and if so, whether it had been reported to the police. They are useful for estimating unrecorded crimes and for looking at trends, but they don't cover crimes without victims, such as drug offences. The most important study is the Crime Survey for England and Wales, conducted annually by the Home Office. The CSCW asks 40,000 people directly in face-to-face structured interviews. And I'll let you have a look at the strengths and weaknesses. But quickly, so strengths: reveals unreported crime, identifies crime trends, and gives victims a choice. Weaknesses: excludes certain crimes, memory and honesty issues, and limited sample. And then we have self-report studies. So these are surveys where a cross-section of the population are questioned on what crimes they have committed. They reveal the social characteristics of those not likely to be detected by the police, for example, age, gender, class, and location. They help uncover systematic bias in the criminal justice system along class, gender, and ethnic lines. The Offending Crime and Justice Survey was conducted annually between 2003 and 2006 in England and Wales to gather self-reported data on offending, drug use, antisocial behaviour amongst young people aged 10 to 25. It was the first national longitudinal self-report offending survey aiming to track changes in criminal behaviour over time. The strengths were that it reveals hidden crimes, it provides offenders insight, and it challenges official statistics. Yet the weaknesses that it has reliability issues, had a limited sample, and also had social desirability bias. So, moving on to the next topic, we have ethnicity and what causes crime. So, Marxists would argue that there is an overlap between class and ethnicity, and this leads to material crimes. Right realists would argue that there are high crime rates in urban areas given the high turnover of population and the reduction in numbers and power of informal agents of social control. Left realists would point to relative deprivation. Interactionists would argue that there is labelling theory that leads to the targeting of ethnic minorities, and this drives a self-fulfilling prophecy. Anti-racists argue that there is an institutional racism in the criminal justice system, especially the police, that targets ethnic groups, particularly those in Black and Asian communities. This leads to mistrust and can drive deviant subcultural activity. So, criminalisation. This is the process through which individuals and actions are turned into criminal actions through the criminal justice system, and this is since labelling takes place. Deviant individuals' actions may not be defined as criminal if the crime is undetected, if the law has changed, or if the courts just simply say so. And there are 5 processes of criminalisation, that is policing, arrests and cautions, prosecution and trials, convictions and sentencing, and finally prison. So, in policing, it was found that there's institutional racism, which was highlighted by the Macpherson report. canteen culture, which reinforces cynical views on positive discrimination and racist views. Black community 5 to 7 more times likely to be stopped and searched than Asian community is twice more as likely than a white counterpart. Only 4% of officers recruited from BAME communities, so the police force is unrepresentative compared to the general, population. However, the BAME community younger and socialises in public, urban areas where street crime is more visible, that is, witnesses. Arrests and cautions. Black community makes up 8.3% of arrests versus 3% of the population. They are more likely to be arrested for an offence they haven't committed. Blacks and Asians are less likely than whites to be cautioned after arrest. Black and Asian communities are more likely than white communities to remain silent given distrust of the police and deny the offence. They feel they are over-policed. However, Asians are half as likely to be tasered, whereas blacks are 3 times more likely than white communities. Prosecution and trial. The Crown Prosecution Service is more likely to drop cases against the BAME community due to weak evidence. However, BAME communities are more likely to opt for a trial by a jury in a Crown Court rather than by a magistrate in the Magistrates' Court due to the mistrust of the magistrate's impartiality. Crown Courts tend to impose more harsh sentences. Convictions and sentencing. BAME communities are less likely to be found guilty. BAME are more likely to go to prison when found guilty, and BAME are more likely to be sent to prison for Class A drugs and burglary. However, pre-sentence reports are biased against the BAME community, who show less remorse to probation officers who advise magistrates on the offender, that is, less able to negotiate a more favourable outcome. And finally, prison. 1/4 of the prison population is black. Black communities are 4 times more likely to be in prison than white. Black and Asians are more likely to be serving long-term sentences, that is more than 4 years, and all ethnic minorities are less likely to be granted bail and remain on remand before trial. So a key word that I mentioned a minute or two ago was institutional racism. So what is institutional racism? Well, it is the collective failure of an organisation to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their colour, culture or ethnic origin. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes and behaviour that amount to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness and racist stereotyping which disadvantages minority ethnic people. The Macpherson report followed the murder of Stephen Lawrence explored institutional racism within the Metropolitan Police. It criticised the police handling of the case and called for reforms to improve accountability, transparency and race relations in policing. The report made 70 recommendations, including treating all racist incidents seriously, improving diversity in the police force and restoring public trust, especially among black and minority ethnic communities. Now, I'm going to say if you haven't watched The Secret Policeman, I would recommend watching it. It does have some very sensitive content and it contains like harmful language, so just bear that in mind. But overall, as a sociologist, I would say that it is a very important watch, especially when looking at crime and deviance. But basically, for those who don't know, it was a BBC documentary that exposed racism within Greater Manchester Police through undercover footage by journalist Mark Daly. And it revealed shocking behaviour among recruits. And I'm not going to read this out, but you could read it, but just as a warning for those who haven't read it yet, there is some unsettling things. So, the documentary sparked national outrage, resignation, and urgent calls for reform in police training and culture. So, victimisation and ethnicity. Racist victimisation is the targeting of people by criminals based on their race, ethnicity or religion. So the Crime Survey England Wales in 2012/13 found that The risk of being a victim was 7.2% for BAME and 5% for white communities. There was a higher proportion of BAME communities in urban areas with higher levels of street crime. There was 124,000 racially motivated incidents, and however, per capita racially motivated incidents happened in rural areas. And then police recorded figures found that 11% of murder victims were black and 9% Asian, against 3.1% and 6.4% of the population of, those ethnic groups. There were 30,000 racially and religious aggravated incidents. Hate crimes had increased by 67% in some police forces. And last season, in terms of football, this is the year that it was taken. It doesn't say. There was a hate crime. I've lost what I was saying now. 79%, which related to race, out of 193 football matches, increased from 131. And something to account for was that the increase of this was attributed to something that's known as the ISIS effect. So that's basically, when an ISIS attack happens, there's a particular attack on like the Muslim community, and there's a belief, that all Muslims are bad, which obviously isn't true, but it's that whole moral panic that gets spread around, so it increases the likelihood of a innocent, Muslim individual being either attacked or verbally abused at just purely because of their religion and their connotations towards it. And then also better recording, more victims willing to come forward. Our next topic is gender, and first we're going to look at functionalist sex role theory. And we've done a lot of talk about functionalism, but can you realise who hasn't came up yet? That's right, Talcott Parsons. So Parsons' sex role theory is rooted in functionalist ideas about gender roles. He argues that traditional gender socialisation leads to differences in crime rates between men and women. So instrumental versus expressive roles. This makes men more prone to risk-taking and deviant behaviour, whereas it discourages criminality in women. Socialisation control. Women's subordinate roles means that they are more closely supervised. Men have less direct supervision and therefore greater opportunities for criminality. Compensatory compulsory masculinity. Boys who lack a father figure may overcompensate by engaging in delinquent behaviour to assert masculinity. This theory helps to explain why men commit more crime than women, particularly violent acts, as they are socialised into aggression and dominance. It links to official crime statistics, which consistently show higher male offending rates. However, it ignores female crime. Women do commit crime, and female offending rates have risen, which we'll find about later in Adler's liberation thesis. It also overgeneralizes. Not all men are socialized into aggression, and not all women avoid crime. And it also ignores structural factors. Crime isn't just about socialization. Poverty, inequality, and opportunity also play a role. So, why do men commit more crime? I'm going to absolutely butcher this probably, so I do apologise, but Messerschmitt looks at hegemonic masculinity and the pressures on males to accomplish this. Hegemonic masculinity emphasizes competitive individualism, aggression and violence in relation to authority and control. Hegemonic masculinity. This is the dominant form of masculinity that most men wish to accomplish. It is defined through paid labour, subordination of women, heterosexuality, and the driven and uncontrollable sexuality of men. Drawing on ideas from Cohen, he argued that young males experience their world collectively, emphasising the importance of school and the peer group, and argues that youth crime is a way of doing masculinity especially when other resources are unavailable. Depending on the age and the class of the male, he may accomplish his masculinity in different ways, some of which may be deviant and/or criminal. For older males, it may be by being a successful breadwinner or, basically beating his wife or being violent or, things like that. For youths, it may be by gaining a reputation for violence, by a number of sexual conquests, by drinking, or by taking part in dares or pranks. For example, think of Jackass, where they do random things, where they just catapult each other into the air naked for no reason, because haha, funny, innit? I swear there's about 5 films on that. Anyways, working class kids form anti-school subcultures or join gangs for status. For example, Willis's lads, middle and upper class kids, commit petty crimes around vandalism and drinking, for example, the Bullingdon Club. For those who don't know, it's basically a really elitist club that quite a few of our prime ministers have been in. I think David Cameron and Boris Johnson were in it together. Or if it wasn't together, it was similar. It was something like that. But yeah, they just did stuff apparently they used to burn money in front of homeless people and stuff like that. I don't know if it's true. I think it is alleged. Don't quote me on it. Don't sue me. So, Mosher characterised hegemonic masculinity as hypermasculinity, referring to its dangerousness and acceptance of violence. For example, a poor jobless youth may display his masculinity and thus enhance his status through sexist banter, wearing gang-style clothing, or by carrying a gun or knife. According to Baird, young males tend to reproduce the existing versions of masculinity they are exposed to while growing up. This explains the violent gang culture prevalent in much of inner-city America. However, he argues that whether young males embark on violence or gang membership as a path towards masculinity depends on the availability of family support and their ability to form socialization spaces away from the street corner, avoiding the gang male role model system. The new right would support this by saying that a lack of a father/instrumental figure, then the individuals will lack discipline, leading to delinquency. And then we have the crisis of masculinity. The crisis of masculinity, which has occurred through globalisation and the decline of industrial jobs, may have led working class males towards more extreme and violent behaviour to accomplish their masculinity, as their traditional breadwinner role has been taken away. Winlow considers this in his studies of working class masculinity in Sunderland, arguing that mass unemployment in the 1980s left many young males in the North East without a breadwinner status, and violence became more significant as a way of expressing their masculinity. From this emerged new masculine careers, including drug dealing stolen goods, and security. This demonstrates how criminality has become an entrepreneurial concern, a way of making money. Extreme examples are seduction boot camps. Many who have had blocked legitimate opportunities in both industry and education can now create YouTube channels and/or online programs to teach men how to pick up women, which is known as the game. These men are charging large sums of money, for example up to £600, and they create their own identities with language reflecting it, such as same-day alert, last-minute resistance, or number farming. However, criticisms of hegemonic masculinity. In a postmodern world, not all men are interested in achieving hegemonic masculinity. Societal attitudes are beginning to change. For example, a stay-at-home dad is still a real man. Jefferson is critical of Messerschmitt. Many men who cannot achieve the cultural ideal forms of dominant masculinity do not turn to crime. That is, it is too deterministic. Also, not all crimes are linked to hegemonic masculinity. For example, green crimes against the environment, which we'll be talking about soon. And then we have cultural criminologists stress the highly emotional nature of crime. Instead of what the criminals will gain, These researchers are interested in how committing a crime makes people feel. The focus of cultural criminologists is on the thrill of the act. It can offer a brief escape from an otherwise dull emotional existence. They argue that there is an intoxicating mix of fear and pleasure that often accompanies risk-taking. Katz argues that people get drawn into crime because it is seductive and thrill-seeking. Postmodernists interpret this simply as part of postmodern society, which calls on us to enjoy our leisure time. Crime is one means whereby some people do just that. Lynn developed this concept of edge work. By this he meant that crime was a means whereby people could get a thrill by engaging in risk-taking behaviour, going right to the edge of acceptable behaviour and challenging the rules of what is acceptable. This risk involved in law-breaking acts as a challenge, and crime is carried out precisely because the rules are in place. Young offenders do not assess their chances that they will be arrested prior to their act. This is why a steady increase in control does not work as a deterrent. Okay, so now we're going to look at more so like female committing of crime, and that is chivalry theorists, which was talked about by Pollock. So the chivalry thesis argues that the criminal justice system is biased in favour of women, meaning they are treated more leniently than men. Key ideas include chivalry in the criminal justice system. Police, judges and juries, who are often male, may be socialised to protect women and be lenient towards them. Women are less likely to be arrested, charged and convicted, or given harsh sentences compared to men. Hidden female crime. Women's crime is underreported because they are skilled at deception. Pollock argued that women's crimes, for example poisoning, are less detectable. This helps to explain why official statistics show lower female crime rates. This can be linked to courtroom decisions where women are often given community sentences instead of prison. Their expressive role also influences decisions in their punishment. For example, Lavinia Woodward was a medical student at Oxford University who stabbed her boyfriend in the leg during an argument. Despite the seriousness of the offence, the judge did not give her a prison sentence, stating that it would damage her future career as a surgeon. Instead, she received a suspended sentence. Next, we have control theorists. So women can be treated worse than men in the criminal justice system. For example, Haydn-Sund's idea of double deviance. When a female goes against her gender norm, she is treated worse because she has not only committed a crime against the state and her victims, but also a crime against her gender. Carlin said that women are less likely to be judged less on the seriousness of the crime, but more on their ability to be a good mother, housewife, or woman. For example, Vanessa George was convicted for abusing children at a nursery, receiving an indeterminate sentence with a minimum of 7 years. She was more newsworthy than the men involved, who only received a 5-year sentence. How could double deviancy be applied to rape victims? Double deviancy affects rape victims when they are judged by not only for the crime committed against them, but also for defying gender norms. Victims may be unfairly blamed for their behavior, clothing, or lifestyle, reinforcing harmful stereotypes. Those who do not fit the ideal victim narrative may face skepticism or marginalization in legal and social contexts. Next, we have liberation thesis, which was discussed by Adler. So the liberation thesis argued that as women gain more equality in society, their involvement in crime increases. Adler argued that traditional gender roles previously restricted women's opportunities to commit crime, but with greater freedom, they engage in more male crimes such as violence and fraud. Women now have equal opportunities in education and the workplace, which has led to a rise in female offending. Female involvement in fraud and theft-related crimes has increased, reflecting their growing participation in economic crimes. In the 1970s, women accounted for around 10% of arrests in the UK, well, England and Wales, whereas in 2023/24, this figure had risen to 16%. However, female crime rates were very low to begin with in the 1960s. Females only make up 13% of arrests and 25% of convictions today, representing 5% of the total prison population. Common crimes like shoplifting and prostitution are not driven by liberation but poverty and addiction. Also, females continue to be exploited by males given their labels as less deviant. For example, male partners forcing them to carry guns or drugs. And then we have biological explanations for crime. So Pollack, the chivalry thesis and biological deviance, argued that women are naturally deceitful due to hormonal cycles and social conditioning, suggesting that female crime is underreported because men in the justice system protect them. However, this lacks empirical evidence and relies on outdated gender stereotypes and ignores structural inequalities. So then we have Lombroso, which claimed female criminals had biological abnormalities, such as masculine traits, that made them more prone to crime, and this suggested that criminal women were biologically inferior and lacked maternal instincts. However, this is based on flawed methodology and ignores social influences and is overly deterministic. And then we have biological and psychological drives. Proposed that women committed crime due to their need for excitement and recognition. It suggested that female offenders manipulate men using sexuality. Criticisms, however, is that it oversimplifies female criminality and reinforces sexist assumptions and also lacks scientific backing. Our next topic is class and criminality. So, what is the link between social class and crime? Well, 60% of 2,000 prisoners had claimed benefits. 60% of prisoners in Glasgow come from deprived council estates. 67% were unemployed prior to prison. 32% were homeless, and 27% were brought up in care. And 43% of adult prisoners had no educational qualifications. So, Marxism and class. According to Marxists, crime is inevitable in capitalist societies because capitalism is criminogenic. Capitalism endorses the unequal divide between classes, therefore committing crime is sometimes the only way people can live their desired life. Within the criminal justice system, there is a selective bias when applying the law. According to Snyder, the capitalist state is reluctant to pass laws that regulate the activities of businesses or threaten their profitability. According to Pierce, false consciousness of an impartial judiciary that is professional allows this to go unchallenged. The law is seen as caring, which is known as the caring face of capitalism. Chambliss argued that laws safeguarding private property form the foundation of capitalist society. The ruling class holds significant influence, enabling them to block legislation that might undermine their interests. They achieve this through lobbying parliament, funding political parties, and devising intricate systems to sidestep regulations. For example, Bernie Ecclestone donated £1 million to the Labour Party in 1997, shortly before the government announced Formula One would be exempt from a proposed ban on tobacco advertising, despite it being a key manifesto pledge. I'll let you have a look at the strengths and, well, just the weaknesses really. And then we have cultural explanations for working class criminality. Cohen argued criminality wasn't always about a lack of money, rather status frustration. Cloward and Owen argued that violence could be used to achieve status with peer groups, and Miller argued that working class Americans turned to criminality to meet their focal concerns, that is toughness and excitement. These were restrained in the workplace, and Murray argued that young men break the law to supplement benefits in their laziness and irresponsibility in a culture of welfare dependency. How do women from low status backgrounds meet their consumer desires? Well, a lot of this leads due to conspicuous consumption, where individuals, despite being on benefits, are willing to get themselves into debt through higher purchases of luxury items in order to construct an identity. They believe they deserve posh items despite being poor. They gain status through showing off to their mates. For example, we watched this video of this woman. We called her, like, the fridge lady. I don't know where the video is, but it was basically like, so she was on benefits, and she'd got herself into debt because she'd like bought this like American fridge freezer, and you know when you pay like a certain amount a month on a product rather than paying it outright. It was like one of those, and in the video she opened the fridge and there was like no food in the fridge, but yet she was showing off to all her friends like, oh look what I've got. And this is the whole part of conspicuous consumption, because you may not have the necessities in life, but because capitalism has built these false needs, we feel like we have to conform to these certain ways. But yeah, it's just a fun little example. So, AL3. Crime can be structurally embedded rather than the choice of the individual. The lack of cultural and material capital can create an impact. However, the process of criminalisation deems working/underclass crimes to be the issue, and it overlooks white-collar innovation. High-status crime. So approximately 150 workers are killed in accidents at work each year. Salmonella and Campylobacter, I don't know if I'm saying that right, kills 100 to 200 people per year in the UK. Air pollution is estimated to contribute to 24,000 deaths each year, and over 32.4 million complaints were made for the PPI scandal, and shows how the offenders in these sorts of crimes do not fit the stereotype of a typical criminal. Therefore, their offences are difficult to detect and are often dealt with enforcement actions rather than criminal prosecution. So we're coming to one of our final topics. Don't worry, we're not at the end yet, but we have reached slide 100, so that's a nice little milestone, I suppose. But this is globalisation. If you've watched all these videos, I really hope you should know this by now, as I do quite drill it into you. But globalisation is in fact the increasing interconnectedness of societies, which was identified by Giddens. So, Held says the widening and deepening and speeding up of worldwide interconnectedness in all aspects of life, from the cultural to the criminal, the financial to the spiritual. The global criminal economy. Globalisation has brought about the spread of transnational organised crime, as well as new opportunities for crime, new means of committing crime, and new offences. Consequently to globalisation, Castells argues that there is now a global criminal economy worth over £1 trillion per annum. Examples of transnational crimes include arms trafficking, trafficking in nuclear materials, smuggling of illegal immigrants, trafficking in women and children, sex tourism, trafficking body parts, and cybercrimes. Oh, and there's more. I'm not reading them. These criminal activities have an end user whose demand is met, such as the drug addict. There may also be a supplier who service this demand, such as the opium farmers in Afghanistan or the arms dealer with excessive stock in post-conflict zones. How do we know the economic value of transnational organised crime? According to Peter Gill, we don't take the 1 trillion criminal economy with a sack full of salt. So you know I'm saying a pinch of salt. Take this full of sack full of salt. Exaggerating and over-reporting the threat may bring more resources to agencies such as the police or border control. How does Gill's argument support the idea that all professionals exist primarily in the protection of their own interests, which is a Marxist perspective? Well, more entrepreneurs. The trillion-dollar figure gives power, status and wealth to those involved in the policing of globalised crime. These include border police, anti-terrorist police, politicians and even the media professionals who produce stories which are very newsworthy and make money for the media industry. Global risk consciousness. Due to globalisation, we feel that problems in countries around the world are big problems in the UK, when in reality they're not. This increases our fear of crime and making us think that the amount is increasing when in fact it isn't. For example, more people in the US are killed by lightning than the number of individuals killed each year by terrorism. Yet, we don't have a fear of the weather and it's not overreported, so arguably the fear is irrational. Bourriard argues that the postmodern world is dominated by simulacra. We no longer try to distinguish reality from image, the two blur together. Bourriard argued that 9/11 was a hyperreal event, where media coverage blurred reality, turning the attack into a simulacrum, a, specta- a spectacle more powerful than the event itself. He controversially suggested that the global media and public engagement reinforced fear and control, making us complicit in the construction of its symbolic meaning. Ian Taylor argues that globalisation has increased the amount of crime happening and the types of crime. The deregulation of financial markets has allowed for movement of funds to avoid taxation. It has also led to new patterns of employment, for example, subcontracting production to poorer countries. Think about the Rana Plaza factory, which I spoke about earlier. Globalisation has increased relative deprivation, leading to an increase in lower-class crime in post-industrial societies like the UK. It has also led to a growth in the number of people from low-income countries seeking a life in high-income countries, facilitated through people trafficking. Consumer culture has spread throughout the world. A strength is that evidence to show the link between globalisation and new forms of criminal activity. It shows how the powerful manipulate variations in national law to their own economic gain by the spatial shifting of criminality. A weakness is that the theory does not explain why some poor people who are exploited do not turn to crime. It is too deterministic. And next we have this thing called local crime. So crime is locally based but with global connections. The heroin trail exemplifies local crime, where global drug networks intersect with local criminal economies. Heroin production in Afghanistan fuels international trafficking routes, supplying markets in Europe, including the UK. Local dealers and users in cities like Middlesbrough engage in street-level distribution, creating a cycle of addiction and violence. This fusion of global supply chains and local criminal activity highlights how illicit economies operate across borders while deeply affecting communities. Also, I thought this was funny because when I googled it, Middlesbrough came up, and for those who don't know, that's where I'm from, so it's quite comical that that's basically what Middlesbrough's known for. It's just drug addicts. Then we have the McMafia. This refers to organisations that emerged after the fall of communism and the deregulation of financial markets. People with access to funds could buy state assets cheaply, get rich quickly, and then use a network of international crime syndicates to protect their vast wealth. Roman Abramovich's wealth and ties to Russian elites reflect the McMafia concept, where oligarchs use global finance to protect assets. UK efforts to tackle Russia's dirty money have linked him to concerns about transnational corruption. This is our second to last topic, I believe, which is green crime. We're getting there, guys. So, semiology is the study of social harm. It argues that we should judge an action not based on whether it is criminal or not, but whether it leads to harm. Global risk. Beck said that environmental crimes are the result of manufactured risks. We have created new environmental risks through our use of technology and manufacturing. Traditional green crime. Situ and Emmons define environmental crime as an unauthorized act or omission that violates environmental law. Transgressive green crime. White says that any action that harms the physical environment and any creature that lives within it, even if no law has technically been broken. Ecocentric does not distinguish between humans and the rest of the ecosystem. It sees harm to all of it. Crimes like animal cruelty or the destruction of habitats are green crimes, regardless of whether there is any specific human cost. Anthropocentric. Humans have the right to exploit the environment and other species for their own benefit. So, types of green crime. Primary crime directly results in the destruction and degradation of the planet's resources such as air pollution, deforestation, species decline, animal abuse, and water pollution. For example, Delhi's severe air pollution is a major health crisis. In 2019 alone, over 150,000 children under the age of 14 died due to air pollution, making it one of the leading causes of child deaths in India. Secondary crime are crimes that are a result of going against existing laws and regulations. For example, state crimes against environmental groups, hazardous waste disposal, and environmental discrimination. And the example of this is that in 1985, French Secret Service agents bombed Greenpeace's Rainbow Warrior in Auckland, New Zealand to prevent protests against French nuclear testing. So, victims of green crime. Those in the developing world, poor and ethnic minorities, are much more likely to be victims of environmental crime due to inability to move from the areas where environmental crimes take place. For example, subsistence fishing communities on Niger Delta. The Niger Delta is a centre for transnational oil crime where global corporations, corrupt officials, and criminal networks exploit resources, causing severe pollution and conflict. Perpetrators of green crime. Individuals have a cumulative effect on the environment. Their acts may not have immediate impact, but soon add up to large impacts. For example, littering or fly tipping. Private businesses. Environmental crime is a typical form of corporate crime. Large corporations are responsible for most of the water, air and land pollution due to waste dumping and health and safety breaches. States and governments. Santana points out that military are the biggest institutional polluter through unexploded bombs and lasting effects of toxic chemicals. And fourth, organised crime has a long-standing relationship with green crime, often in conjunction with governments and industry through contracts for waste disposal, for example. Was that? Anyways, I'm confused, but we're moving on. Was the for example before or after? Have I missed something off? I don't know. I'm tired. We're almost there. So, policing green crime. Policing green crime is difficult. International laws are difficult to construct and enforce. Borders are fixed, but the environment is fluid. Laws that exist are shaped by powerful capitalist interests and often respond to political populism and not the needs of the environment. Environmental crime is worth between $19 $19,260 billion, per annum. The forces of law and order cannot compete on funding. Global crime networks, including the McMafia, ensure this. And as usual, I will let you go through the evaluation. After what feels like forever, we've finally reached the final topic, that is state crime. So state crime is illegal or deviant activities perpetrated by or with the complicity of state agencies. What gives the state the ability to commit crimes on a large scale? They hold a monopoly on the uses of threat of violence through the police and armed forces. They define what is legal and illegal through the lawmaking process and criminal justice system. They maintain secrecy over their own actions and legitimize this on the grounds of national security. And national sovereignty, states are the supreme authority within its own borders, means that it is very difficult for external authorities to intervene. Examples of state crime are war crimes, genocide, political repression, corruption, and police brutality. I'll let you look through those examples if you'd like. Types of state crime. So McLaughlin identified 4 types of state crime, each illustrating different ways governments can engage in criminal activity. So political crimes such as corruption, censorship, or election fraud. Crimes by security forces, genocide, torture, or unlawful imprisonment. Economic crimes, violations of health and safety laws, exploitation or financial misconduct. And we have societal and cultural crimes, such as institutional racism, discrimination, or human rights abuse. And again, I will let you have a look at those if you want to look at actual specific examples of each of those. Or you can apply your own, these are just recommendations. So, what is the problem with defining state crime? Well, state legalised actions that in most states would be illegal. For example, Saudi Arabia can imprison and torture those who are critical of the state. 2. International laws is open to interpretation and difficult to enforce. International law lacks clear enforcement mechanisms and is often interpreted differently by governments, allowing states to justify or deny wrongdoing. Powerful nations can evade accountability through legal loopholes, political influence, or selective prosecution. Human rights are social constructs by white liberal men that enable them to exploit women workers in lower-income countries and expert political domination. Western countries are hegemonic by criticizing abuse of human rights in other low-income countries or newly emerging economies. Last slide, guys, and I'm going to say this wrong probably, but we have state crimes and Schwendinger. Definitely wrong. A state crime is a violation of a basic human rights rather than the breaking of legal rules. Therefore, states that deny individuals human rights should be regarded as criminal. For example, the Nazi state attacked the human rights of Jews and other German citizens, perfectly legal by passing laws that persecuted them. Similarly, the Rwandan state passed laws to persecute the Tutsi minority, and this was supported by the Belgians. If we accept a legal definition, we risk becoming subservient to the state that makes the law. The spiral of denial. Dictatorships simply deny committing human rights abuses, but democratic states must legitimize their crimes in more complex ways. Number one, it didn't happen. Number two, if it did happen, it was not what it looks like. And number three, even if it is what you say it is justified, for example, to protect their national security. Neutralization theory. So it's denial of the victim, denial of the injury, denial of responsibility, condemning the condemners, and appeal to higher loyalty. And we have crimes of the obedience by ordinary people, which is authorization, routinization, and dehumanization. And that finally leads us to the end. I didn't lie, did I, when I said this is going to be the longest video yet? And I'm surprised I've actually managed to condense it. Like, yeah, it's been 2 hours, but oof. But I just want to say a massive thank you if you've made it to the end and you're actually hearing this message. Whether you've watched the whole, like, what do we call this, like a series of like my long walkthrough videos, or if you just watched this one, or if you watched parts of them, I appreciate it all so much. And obviously, now that I've finished them all, leave recommendations in the comments of other smaller videos you'd like, because I don't intend of making videos this length ever again. Don't get me wrong, it's fun, and I do actually enjoy it, but you have to admit it is a bit long. But I hope you found these useful. Let me know in the comments, provide feedback, and yeah, I hope to see you all again soon.